camera voice is Jay Malinowski, and I'll be interviewing today Tom Levy, who most recently was general manager, full-time job was general manager, retired as general manager of Coachella Valley Water District, which may be called from time to time the Coachella Valley County Water District, which was its original name. This is November the 9th, 2018. We're in the facilities provided by the San Diego County Water Authority in San Diego, and we appreciate that. And then finally, this oral history is part of a long-term project. The very first ones were done about 18 years ago, and we have 30 or 40 of them available now. And it's done on behalf of the Colorado River Board of California and their association group, the California, I forgot what.
Colorado River Association of California.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I'm the one that got that name.
Yeah,
3 years.
I know.
And then I forget the name of it. So it's the Colorado River Association of California, CRA. So with that introduction, hopefully you'll be hearing virtually nothing more from me, but I may interrupt from time to time. So Tom, let's start a little bit with your background. A lot of people who were your contemporaries, myself included, knew that you started out as an aerospace engineer. How did you get into water?
Well, it was one of those things. I worked for a rocket manufacturer in the San Fernando Valley, and I grew up in the LA area and knew that there were layoffs and so forth. And the company I was with went from 20,000 people down to 4,000, and we were on our way back up. And I had gotten married in 1970 and knew that I would be in my 40s or 50s when the next cycle came through, and I would be overpaid and under educated compared to the new kids coming out of school. And the reason I'd made it through the layoff is I was poorly paid and well educated. So we had gone down to the Indio Date Festival, and I was going to Loyola University in Los Angeles to get a degree in environmental engineering. And I picked up some stuff from a booth that the Coachella Valley County Water District had to pad a report I was doing. And so when I graduated, I sent them a resume really on a lark, and they called and said, hey, would you come down for an interview? I did, and they hired me.
So your formal education then went from aerospace originally into sanitation, civil engineering, water-oriented
Yes.
professional degrees.
Yeah, I went to UCLA undergrad, and the head of the engineering school felt that you would have a broad engineering background, and then you would specialize by getting a master's. Well, I suspect like 90% of the people were like me. You got a degree and you wanted to go get some money, and so you left. So I could do mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, or civil in there, or electrical. And so it was an easy transition because I had a broad background into environmental engineering, which was at that time sanitation and domestic water.
So you went to work for the district, I think, in 1972, and I think you probably went to work for Lowell Weeks, if I'm not mistaken, as general manager. What were some of the key issues at that moment in time?
Well, from the engineering department standpoint and the sanitation standpoint, the district had 3 approved grant applications under the Clean Water Grant Program to build treatment plants. And so they had a engineering firm do the plans, and my job as sanitation engineer was to review them and provide comments on them, and then work through the process to get from an approved application to approved plans to getting them built.
These were treatment plants for sewage.
Yeah, these were wastewater treatment plants. There were three of them. One served the Palm Desert area, Rancho Mirage, and Indian Wells. That was the biggest one. There was one in North Shore, and then there was one in Bombay Beach, which was a lagoon system there. And we took and went with the plants. There were problems with all three of them that we had to address, but we did. We got the grants. We got them built. There were some hiccups, like the district and the engineer they'd used designed the building at the Palm Desert plant to include a boardroom for the board, and a few things like that. And it was adjacent to the Whitewater River stormwater channel, and EPA said you had to move 300 feet, have all your structures 300 feet away from the channel or line the channel. And so the district went out and bought some land from a person that was desert. I mean, it was, the whole area was just pure desert, and the guy district was buying it from said, you can have all the land, or you can have the piece you need, but you're going to pay the same price either way. So we took all the land, which turned out to be a good thing, because that's where we built the Palm Desert office 20 years later in there.
Was at this time when this was going on, was the Salton Sea still a tourist attraction, or had it begun its demise?
I'm going to say it had started its demise, but it was still a popular place. One of the things I did in the first couple of years was went down to the North Shore Yacht Club and gave a talk on different things the district was doing. And there were a crowd of people. 10 years later, you could go down there and there was nobody.
Well, that's kind of, people watching this are going to go, yacht club? Yacht club and Salton Sea don't seem to go together.
Well, it was amazing. Before I went to the district, I had a private pilot's license and flew down and landed at an airstrip at North Shore and walked over, had lunch, and then walked back. And so when I went to work for the district, I'm looking for the airport, and it was underwater.
Very good. I'll tell you what, since we're on the Salton Sea, I was going to get to this later, but since we're there, where is the Salton Sea today? I mean, your district influenced it. Your activities, for better or worse, influenced it. What's going on here in the year 2018 with the Salton Sea?
Well, let me just give you the Tom Levy brief history. The sea in the period of the 1970s and 80s and maybe early 90s was increasing in the surface of the water. It was coming up, and we, an Imperial Irrigation District, were sued by various groups, including the Torres Martinez Band of Indians. And they won. because there was so much water going in.
Is that what came to be known as the Elmore suit, or am I thinking?
No, Elmore was one of the people who sued IID because his farmland was getting flooded. He was right adjacent to the sea, and he filed a complaint with the State Water Resources Control Board on waste of water.
Okay, so Elmore is a different event.
It's a different event, but it's the same problem. There was Imperial Irrigation District put in over 1 million acre feet of water a year into the sea, and that brought the level up in there. Today, because of improved efficiencies and people transferring water, the level of the sea has gone down. It's down where the salinity of the sea back in the heyday was a little less than ocean water. I'll say about 30 to 35,000 parts per million. It now is someplace up around 70,000 parts per million. And the level's going down. You can, if you're down there, you can see where the shoreline used to be and where it is today. And it's a tremendous difference.
Were you still at Coachella Valley when I don't think you were, but were you still there when the state offered to pony up several hundred millions of dollars for a Salton Sea fix, or was that long after your time?
No, that was actually something that came out of the QSA.
Okay.
And the QSA is Quantification Settlement Agreement. And one of the concerns that Imperial Irrigation District, or IID, and Coachella had was, as you made these transfers that were required in the Quantification Settlement Agreement, you were going to reduce flow into the sea. And we provided mitigation water to get through for 15 years. And then it stopped. But the state, in order to get us to sign the Quantification Settlement Agreement, agreed that they would pick up the tab for the Salton Sea above the 50 million or so that the agencies agreed to pay.
And has that come about?
They haven't come up with the money for a real solution. They've doing a few minor things around the sea in there, but they're not doing it on a big enough scale.
Okay, we'll come back to the QSA a little later, but I'm going to keep a little bit of chronology going here. You talked in some notes that you provided to me about what I thought was really something, a tropical storm Kathleen in 1976 that changed the landscape out there.
Yes. The Coachella Valley County Water District became a stormwater district in the 1930s. In the depth of the Depression, you had two agencies that were, I'm going to say, in effect, broke, and so they merged. And the County Water District was the agency that came out of it. But there was a channel that ran from above Palm Springs down to the Salton Sea when I came to work for the district. And it was dry. And I'd drive through it, and there were dip crossings at that time. And so you'd look and you'd say, why is there this stupid ditch here? You know, it's 300 feet wide, 20 to 30 feet deep in there. And I found out in 1976. Lowell Weeks, who was the general manager at that time, was celebrating his 20th or 20.
I think it was his 30th year
No.
here at the district.
Yeah, it's less than that.
I'll check your notes.
It might be. I could be off in my notes, but he was celebrating it by taking some of the managers and some of the staff that he worked with out to a lunch in Indio. And so there were dark clouds when we went into the lunch, and then you saw some of the operations people leaving in the middle of lunch. And so after lunch, Bill Longnecker, who was head of the engineering department, and I drove out to Indian Wells, and there was some water in the streets. It was raining hard, and we got out and walked over, and there was a district storm channel behind a row of houses, and we walked around, and you could see the channel was over full. It was flooding out into people's yards, and we knocked on the door of the house we were at, and a woman said, "Come in." And so we opened the door, and they had a sunken living room, and at that time they had a sunken pool. It was flooded in there. And so I understood why you had to have that big ditch that's dry most of the time.
And that water flowed uncontrolled to the Salton Sea, but did Coachella Valley Water District change that to do anything with that flow?
No.
It continued to flow to the sea?
It continues to flow to the sea. The problem is that you have an infrequent flow. The last time they had a flow in there prior to 1976 was probably 20 or 30 years earlier. So you can't really build a system to do anything with that water when it's that infrequent that it comes. Now, what we did do is all of a sudden, the district from the time period of the 1960s, it started growing, the population increased. Interstate 10 came through the valley, so people from coastal Southern California, LA, Orange County, could drive out in a couple of hours and be in the desert, play golf, this sort of stuff. So you had a population increase in second homes. People, developers would come in. You could buy a section of land, 640 acres, develop it, put in a golf course, and sell condominiums. And they sold like mad. And so the thing they needed was they needed water, they needed sanitation, and so those were things the district, and flood control, and those were the things the district could provide. And so the district did after Kathleen, which ran through both Indian Wells and through houses in Palm Desert, there was a cry, we got to do something about this. So the district hired Bechtel Engineering to develop a master plan. They did a great job. The only problem is it ran through a significant portion of the housing in Palm Desert. And so
Existing housing.
Existing housing. And so people, it was dead on arrival. And I had spent a lot of time wandering around Palm Desert after the storm, Indian Wells, that sort of stuff. And so I decided I needed to figure out what we could do. And so I developed a flood control plan. The big problem was the district had some right-of-ways, but they were too narrow to be able to build channels the size that you needed in there. So what I did was say, we need to build some detention basins to hold the water and release it slowly. And slowly is a couple of days as compared to an hour. And so we could do that, and that plan the board bought, and we went ahead and built those facilities. And one of those things that happened, somebody suggested, why not use redevelopment agencies to fund the stormwater? And it worked. The city of Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, and Indian Wells formed redevelopment agencies. They gave the money to the district, and the district built the flood control facilities. If we had tried to raise it on just a vote of the people on a tax to do it, we would have lost. I mean, a week after the storm, people were saying, "Oh, it never rains here."
Yeah, that's the way it works. So the district, you provided me with a 100-year anniversary book that the district did, and one of the things that caught my eye in there was a very early photograph, long before you and I. And it said, "Artesian wells, cheap water, come down here and grow." I'm not exactly sure what the wordage was, but it was advertising the availability of artesian wells, just water bubbling to the surface. What happened to that? And then just walk us through, and I know it's before your time, but I also know that you're a history buff and you know the history. Walk me through the progression as the district, Coachella Valley Water District, became multi-talented, if you will. They started with artesian wells, here, take the water. And that's not what they are today.
Yeah, well, actually, there are some today. It started with the Southern Pacific Railroad. They had a stop in Indio to change. They ran from Yuma, and because it's so flat, they could carry one engine locomotive could pull a lot more cars than they could pull up the grade into San Bernardino. So they would have one locomotive pull it across to Indio, and then they would break the cars down and pull them up in smaller increments, so they didn't have a big load. Well, when they're setting up and building their camp, or they're building a yard, they drill a well. And the old pictures, probably the one you saw, you could see like the old picture of the oil well spurting out there, only it was water. And Southern Pacific received land grants on every other section for building the railroad. And so they said, hey, let's advertise, let's sell this land. It's good for farming. And they did that. And the problem is, the more people who were drilling wells and using it for farming reduced the amount of water available from the groundwater basin, and the levels went down. And so that meant you had to come up with a solution for it. And the district became the solution. In the 1920s, the board of directors of the water district went to Washington, D.C. To push the Boulder Canyon Project Act, to push the compact, Colorado River Compact in there, so that they could get a canal to bring water from the Colorado River into the Coachella Valley. And so that was the solution to wells going down, was bring in another supply, a surface water supply, and deliver it to the farms. So they did that. There were a few hiccups along the way. The district got formed because some people in Imperial Valley, which had a private company that had built a canal through Mexico using an old river there, and delivered water for farmers there, had thought about and talked about building a canal from the Whitewater area above Palm Springs to bring water out of those mountains down to provide high quality water for drinking in the Imperial Valley. I wish I knew what they were smoking when they were doing it, because it just didn't make, you look at the distance you're going there, and the amount of water that comes out of there, out of the Whitewater normally, it didn't make any sense. But it galvanized the people in the Coachella Valley to say, we need to form a water district. And they formed Coachella Valley County Water District. And so that became the entity that contracted for Colorado River water. And in order to get the contract, Coachella had to agree to give IID a priority over IID for water.
No, over CVWD.
Over CVWD, I'm sorry, you're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And underneath, by the way, PVI, Palo Verde Irrigation
Yeah.
District, is that correct?
Yeah. In 1931, water agencies in California came up with something called the Seven-Party Priority Agreement. And that agreement sets it where the ag agencies have the first three priorities, and then urban Southern California has the next two priorities, okay? And then, being good water people, they over-allocated water. And so there's another couple, there's a sixth and a seventh in there. But the first priority went to Palo Verde Irrigation District because they were the first ones in California that filed for water. And in California water law and water law in the West, first in time is first in right. So they have the first priority for the Palo Verde Valley. Then you have a little project of the Bureau in the Yuma area, the Yuma Project Reservation Division, that has the second priority. It's not very big, and so it's not a significant player water-wise. Then you have the third priority, which is split and has IID and Coachella in 3A and the Palo Verde Mesa in 3B. And it's for X number in the Palo Verde Valley, it's for X number of acres there on the Mesa. In the Coachella and Imperial Valleys, it's for the Imperial and Coachella Valleys in there.
But Imperial's allocation, IID's allocation, is higher than Coachella's,
Yes.
is it not?
Yes, because of the 1934 compromise agreement. And in there, IID had more political power with the Department of Interior at that time, and they were able to keep Coachella from getting a contract to build the Coachella Canal until we agreed to give them a priority. And so that priority back then everybody felt there was going to be an infinite amount of water on the Colorado, not a big deal. But as you get other things happening, like Arizona developing, Nevada developing, so forth, and the U.S. Supreme Court in Arizona v. California throwing out some of California's wild claims, it became a real issue in there.
It's interesting to draw a parallel, correct me if I'm wrong, but years later, when the Central Arizona Project was seeking funding, they really needed urban Southern California support in the federal legislature to get that funding. And the CAP, they gave up some priorities to Southern California, did they not?
Yeah. What happened?
So I mean, it's just an interesting, go ahead, it's just an interesting parallel.
Yeah, is the U.S. Supreme Court in Arizona v. California ruled that California, in time of shortage, was limited to 4.4 million acre-feet of water. If you look at the Colorado River compact and go back, the three lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, get 7.5 million acre-feet. California has 4.4 million acre-feet, but they also had claims for a bunch of other water that they felt they were going to get. The U.S. Supreme Court in Arizona v. California threw out those claims and said, California, you got 4.4. And so this was 1962, 63, 64 timeframe. So Arizona then started wanting to get funding for the Central Arizona Project. And in 1968, they got a bill through Congress. But as part of that bill, they had to agree that the Central Arizona Project and a little project in Nevada would go dry before California would be cut below 4.4 million acre-feet. So it gave a tremendous advantage to California. It protected them because the Central Arizona Project is about 1.2 million acre-feet of water. So they got a buffer there. And the California ag agencies have another buffer in that Metropolitan follows the ag agencies. And the ag agencies get the first 3.85 million acre-feet. And then Met would be, if there were a cut in California, Met would be cut back before the California ag agencies would. And then as you move down through the system, Coachella would be cut before IID. And so it's one of those things that...
It's proven to be a little theoretical, has it not, at this stage of the game?
It's been a lot theoretical in that people have worked out ways around it, okay? Including Coachella, okay? Coachella had the position that, or was in the position, that as IID increased their water use, it would cut into Coachella. Now, that wasn't a problem when California, Arizona, and Nevada weren't using the full entitlements. But as they started using full entitlements, there wasn't surplus water, and Coachella could easily see that they could get hurt in there. And so it became a real issue, and the resolution of it started in the 1980s, and I'm going to say when I became general manager, okay? And
Was that when the 500,000 or bust campaign started? You might,
you mean this one?
yeah, that's what I mean. Can check and make sure we've got a decent vision of that. We okay?
Okay.
All right. So now tell us what did that mean, and where did the 500,000? Where were you afraid it would go, and where did it come from if you were going to get it?
Okay. Well, let me just slide back a little bit. Okay. We were talking about the artesian wells, and they were going down. They had to go from artesian wells to pumps and so forth. The upper valley started to develop, and it went from being in 1950 sand dunes, everything from Palm Springs to Indio, to a lot of development, new cities, big population increases, this sort of stuff. And they all wanted to drink water and use water on their golf courses and this stuff. So the district in 1963 signed on to the State Water Project to get additional water that could be delivered down. And so they signed on to that to bring water in. We knew we needed to do something in the lower valley to recharge. And the problem in the lower valley is that the Salton Sink used to be, over eons, used to flood. And it brought the material out of the Grand Canyon and deposited it in the lower Coachella Valley. So you had a clay layer or several clay layers in there. So if you went to recharge, you poured it on the surface, it went down 8 feet and then started working its way back up. And that was a problem in farming, and why the district had to install drain systems to take the saline water after it goes down through the plant and take it down to the salted sea in there. So they did, the district built that system, but it didn't help solve the overdraft. And overdraft is just a way of saying the amount of water you're pumping out is less than the amount of water you're putting in there. And so the district was replenishing water above Palm Springs in some spreading basins that they built. And we needed something in the lower valley. But one of the problems, you got to have water to put in. And with IID, using more water and putting more water into the Salton Sea, it looked like you could have a situation where Coachella would be cut in the actual water they needed for farming, let alone the water for recharge. So I had hired the district had used the USGS, United States Geological Survey, to do groundwater modeling for the district. And I looked at it and said, eventually we're going to have to go to court. And the USGS, they're a great organization, but they're not who you want in court. Okay? So we hired a geologist, hydrogeologist, that was at University of Texas, and then after we hired him, he moved up to UC Davis to do groundwater modeling for us. And he came up with numbers of what the overdraft was. And one of the numbers that sticks in my mind was like 140,000 acre feet a year of overdraft.
So you were pulling 140,000 acre feet of water more from the groundwater than was being naturally replenished. Is that
Naturally or man-made replenished,
all right?
because we were doing a little replenishment
Okay.
there. So my task was to try to figure out how to get more water. And the first real activity there was IID had been sued by the Elmore family for flooding their property. And they went before the state board, State Water Resources Control Board, on a waste of water issue. And the state board said that IID would be wasting water if they didn't do something to improve their efficiencies. And so IID started negotiating with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And they came to a agreement in late 1988. And I had told both the general managers of both agencies that they needed to deal with Coachella before they're do an agreement. Because under the priority agreement, if IID saves water, it has to flow through Coachella, and Coachella can take it for free if they have a need for it. And so there was, they decided, that Levy, he's just a new general manager, he's not going to last long. And they said, we'll run over him. So they came out with press releases on a great deal and their board approvals. And so I had our talk to the board, got authorization to file litigation. We had our attorneys go down and file it in San Diego, federal court in San Diego. And then I called Carl Baranki, and said, who was the general manager of Metropolitan, and said, Carl, I hate to tell you this, but we just filed. And
his reaction was,
you did what? But, and I told him, we're willing to talk. But I told you before, you got to deal with us. And that was, we eventually came up with a deal. And there was, to me, the wording was extremely clear that said if Coachella needed up to 50,000 acre feet of water that was being conserved by this IID Metropolitan deal, then Coachella could get it, and at no cost. And so that was everyone agreed to it. And it came back in the quantification settlement agreement when I pulled out the agreement and said, guys, this is 50,000 acre feet of water here, that's ours. And Metropolitan got up and walked out of the room.
And so, I mean, that had to be resolved.
It had to be resolved at that point, which was 2002, 2003.
Well, was the QSA the resolution? Or?
Yes. The solution, the path to a solution started, I'm going to say, in 1988 and went through 2003. Okay, there were multiple attempts at trying to find a solution. Everybody in the water business knew that California at some point was going to be held to 4.4 million acre feet because Arizona was going up and Nevada was going up. So we had about every 2 years, you'd have somebody come in. It was either somebody in the Department of Interior or somebody at DWR. We had Bob Hertzberg, who was Speaker of the Assembly in California, try to do it, just, all sorts of things. And it really took Bruce Babbitt ultimately telling California, no, you're at 4.4 million acre feet this year. And if you don't get your problem solved, somebody's going to lose water.
Well, let's talk about that title, Quantification Settlement Agreement. Kind of an odd title for a project or a program that makes water available. What's the importance of the word quantification in the title of that?
Okay. The 1931 Priority Agreement was flexible. It didn't set a requirement of Coachella could only get X number of acre feet, IID could only get this amount, so that you had to quantify them. You had to say, Coachella, you're going to get 330,000 acre feet a year. That's your base in your contract. IID, you're going to get 3.1 million acre feet in there. And those are the numbers that finally came out, but those numbers floated around over a 10 or 15 year period.
Well, prior to the quantification settlement agreement, is it accurate to say that Imperial and Palo Verde and maybe Coachella were given enough water to irrigate X number of acres?
They were given up until...
And that's what made it flexible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my...
Yeah. You had the 7.5 million acre feet that the lower basin state, 3 lower basin states got. And then you had Arizona, that the Central Arizona Project wasn't using its full entitlement. Nevada wasn't using its full entitlement. And you had some flood flows on the river that made it where the agencies could take as much water as they wanted. And then we had a time period where you couldn't do that. So we had to come up with a solution. And that solution was, I'm going to say, painful for everybody. It cost Coachella money that we felt was we shouldn't have to pay. IID had to do conservation, and they got people to pay them to do it, San Diego County Water Authority, Metropolitan, and Coachella in there. But they had to change how they operated.
So the program that existed in what came to be called IID-1, that was between IID and MWD with Coachella sort of in the middle getting what it needed.
Yeah.
Then there was an IID-2.
Yeah.
That never happened.
Yeah.
What was that? And why didn't it happen? And were you responsible?
Well, I'm sure IID and Met would say I'm responsible. I'm going to say that it's one of the different plans that people talked about. And what happened in those plans, there was this stick in the mud called Levy or Coachella that said, what's in it for us? The water has to come through us. That's what the law, that's what the agreements are. And without coming up with a solution for Coachella, the deals, no one was willing to go forward with the deals.
Other than taking your name in vain, in a good-natured way from time to time, what did the other agencies say about Coachella standing in the way? How were you, how was Coachella and maybe yourself characterized?
Well,
because these discussions went on for years.
oh yeah, they went from 1988 to 2003, and there were pauses in them, but people were always working in the background, trying to figure out solutions. You get the Bass brothers who came in and bought a significant amount of acreage in Imperial Irrigation District with the intention of fallowing it and selling the water to coastal Southern California. And, they said, oh yeah, we're going to do it, we can do it. And we kept telling them, you can't without getting Coachella's permission. I mean, you can do the conservation, you can do the fallowing, but we can take the water for free. And we had a meeting with their representative in Imperial, a gentleman named Arden Moore, with two of my board president and vice president and myself. And he told us that they had control of the California state legislature, and they would get laws changed that would make it where Coachella had no rights and the water would just flow through. And after the meeting was over with, I went to the restroom, and he followed me in and told me he was going to get me fired. And,
This is the Bass Brothers representative.
Yeah, the Bass Brothers representative. Eventually, they sold the land to IID at dirt cheap prices because they figured out that they didn't own the state legislature, and they didn't have a way of getting around Coachella.
Tell me a little bit about the relationship, and it may be a roller coaster, I'm not sure, between you and IID, and you and Met, and you and PVID. I mean, those are the four big players.
Yeah.
There are some other players,
Yeah.
we know that.
But
those are the big four.
Yeah. It's one of those things that is a strange relationship to some people. We would fight with IID, and then we would go to dinner with their general manager. Okay. David Hayes, who was a deputy Secretary of Interior, was trying to do a settlement, quantification settlement type thing. And he would have us fly all over the country for it. We saw Denver, Seattle, Washington, D.C.,
San Francisco.
all the good stuff. And IID chartered a plane, picked us up in the Coachella Valley, and we flew to Denver together, and we flew back. And we argued all the time in the meeting in Denver. On the way back, way up and way back, we were sociable. Metropolitan, we got along with the people. They recognized that we had differences, but again, we'd go out to dinner. We had a cordial relationship, other than when we're in the negotiations.
Well, indeed, you talked earlier about the State Water Project. The Coachella Valley has a State Water Project entitlement, but they don't have a turnout for State Water Project water.
Right.
They had to do something, and what might that have been?
Yeah. No. I mean, one of the things that I have never understood, and Lowell Weeks is my hero. So he was general manager before me. But in 1963, when you can visualize how small the population of the Coachella Valley was, he got the board to approve a state water contract to bring water to the Coachella Valley. The only problem was there was no aqueduct going to be built as part of the State Water Project to bring the water in. So the board bought into what I say is a $500 million plus agreement with no way to get the water in. Lowell and Metropolitan worked out a deal where they would put a turnout off of their Colorado River Aqueduct that runs through the upper portion of the Coachella Valley and release water to us. And there are state entitlement in there in exchange for, they would give us Colorado River water, and they would take our entitlement at San Bernardino and deliver that to their customers. So it was a one-for-one trade, and it worked magnificently, still works magnificently. And we had those relationships going on at the same time.
Well, and you've got another one. Doesn't IID sell power in your service area?
Yes.
How did that happen?
That was one of the pieces of the compromise agreement, that Coachella agreed that IID could serve power. And back then it wasn't a very lucrative business. Today, there are more power customers of IID in the Coachella Valley than there are in the Imperial Valley. And we actually sued them over an interpretation of we're supposed to get a certain percentage of the net proceeds. And I think we spent $4 million in our attorney's cost fighting over the issue of what does net power proceeds mean. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing, but IID provides power for our wells, for our canal system, everything.
So do people in Coachella's service area, do they actually get a bill, an electric bill from IID?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, when I lived in Indio, I got a bill every month from IID.
And they never turn your power off?
And they never turned my power off. I left before I was an antagonist of them.
Well, you mentioned Lowell Weeks, and for historical purposes, Lowell was an early subject in this oral history project, and it was a terrific interview. I don't remember all of the ones we've done, but I remember that one, and he's really quite good. So for anyone that wants to dig a little bit into Lowell's background and what his thoughts were, just be aware that there is an oral history of Lowell on tap, available for you at the Colorado River Board. Now, having said all of that, you worked with Lowell for a long time, and you've already identified him as one of your heroes. But why is that? Lowell is one of the real water leaders, bridging the 30s, 40s, 50s, well, not the 30s, but 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Lowell.
Lowell was one of those people that you could work for, but you never felt like you were working for him. You were working with him. I mean, he was just that sort of a personality. He was born in Imperial Valley, served in World War II, worked for Imperial Irrigation District, went to school at University of Southern California, is my recollection. Worked, I think, for Caltrans for a while, and then took a job with Coachella Valley County Water District in about 1950. And he became general manager, I think, 6 years later. He led the district through the Arizona v. California lawsuit, and did an excellent job on that. I mean, he took, and he was a leader in agricultural drainage, developed he arranged to get the salinity lab at University of California at Riverside set up, so there would be people that are experts in drainage that could help solve the problem in the Coachella Valley. He got that pushed through. He was a tremendous, on the irrigation and drainage side, had tremendous vision. He had the district build one of the first supervisory control systems in the water business that controlled our canal, so that you could, from Coachella, you could operate gates 100 miles away.
So electronic.
Through electronics in there. And did that. He negotiated things like on the Salinity Control Act, which one of the things that...
Hey, look who it is. Let's take a break.
Okay.
Okay, we took a minor break there, and we're going to come back with Tom. And Tom, we were talking before we were so rudely interrupted. You were talking about Lowell Weeks and his general managership and the fact that he was really a hero of yours in the water biz.
Yeah, Lowell, one of the things when I took over as general manager, Lowell was known and respected by everybody. I had to spend the first the first year I was general manager, I was out of the district 120 days, just making myself known, because Lowell was known by so many people. And not only known, but well liked, and he had the ability to look ahead, I'm going to say, decades. His decision, or his getting the district to join the State Water Project, it didn't really, wasn't needed until the 1980s. And yet, 20 years earlier, he had gotten it approved, and the district was paying taxes on it for that whole time. And just things like that. He saw the need. There was the 1968 Salinity Control Act, if I got my years right.
That's right.
The Mexican government was upset because we were giving them water that had significant TDS in it, total dissolved solids in it, and they were trying to farm with it. And so they were threatening to take it to the World Court, that you had to deliver suitable water. So the U.S. passed this act and agreed to a certain standard at the Mexican border compared to at Imperial Dam. And they were going to solve this by putting a desalination plant on the border to take water from Weldon Mohawk in Arizona, drainage water, and reclaiming that, removing the salts, and providing that to Mexico. But they needed time to build the plant. And so they authorized lining the first 49 miles of the Coachella Canal. And that canal was leaked 132,000 acre-feet a year. That's almost half the amount of water Coachella used.
When it was dirt, earth and loam.
When it was sand, yeah. So that they, and Lowell was one of the people who came up with the idea that said, hey, you need a source of water, what about this? And got it set up as long as they were using the water to meet the treaty obligation. The Coachella Valley Water District didn't have to pay the payments for the lining, that first 49 miles. And you go, that was amazing. And so he had the ability to look and say, we're going to need that water someday. We got to reduce it. And here's a chance to get somebody else to pay for most of it.
Was the remainder of the canal lined ultimately?
Yes. As part of the quantification settlement agreement, the middle section of the Coachella Canal was lined. The last section of the canal was lined initially from North Shore up around Indio in there. The first section was lined in the 1970s. And then in the period 2003 to 2010, the middle section was lined. And that was paid for by the San Diego County Water Authority. And it provided water for San Diego and for the San Luis Rey Indians.
So they paid, the Water Authority paid to conserve it, and in exchange, they got the water.
Yeah. With Coachella getting some call rights on some of the water.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that you got something else, something extra out of it.
Well, we actually did one more than that. No, that's okay. Yeah. We were able to eventually, as part of a settlement of the San Luis Rey Indian issue, get the repayment obligation taken off totally on the lining of the first 49 miles of the canal. So we got that. But the canal, you have to go back, and it's hard in today's world to look at it and think, when they built both the All-American Canal and then the Coachella Branch, which comes off, seems to be about 30 miles west of the Colorado River, and goes up to on the east side of the Imperial Valley and up to Coachella Valley, wraps around Indio and comes down. That water was so plentiful that people they designed it as an earthen channel, both of them. And it wasn't until the 1990s and the 2000s that they were ultimately fully lined. And you look at it and go, what? I mean, IID canal, it lost a lot of water, not as much as the first section of the Coachella, but you look at it today and think, given the value of water, why wouldn't you line it? But we had extra water back then. So you lost 150, 200,000 acre feet of water to seepage. That's no big thing.
What actually happened to that water? I mean, okay, it seeped into the ground, but where did it go from there? Didn't it disappear?
Well, on the All-American Canal, it would flow into Mexico. Okay, so it flowed into Mexico, and then the Mexicans pumped it and used that water. We did a project that put a well field along the All-American Canal that pumped water out and pumped it back into the All-American Canal. And that water was used to provide water for people along the Colorado River that didn't have rights, water rights in there. So that rather than fight people, that had a homestead and it's 100 years old and their family's been there that time period, and big metropolitan imperial are going in and cutting off their water because they don't have a legal right. We decided from the PR standpoint, it made sense to solve that problem. And we solved it by pumping some of that water that has seeped out.
Along similar lines, and I probably should have asked this before, was Coachella integral in Indian water rights issues?
Not significantly. I mean, we were wrapped up in the San Luis Rey settlement, but that was not from our desire. There was a San Diego lobbyist who had worked for Congressman Packard, and he slipped language in to take water from the middle reach of the Coachella Canal. And fortunately, President Clinton vetoed the bill for some other reason. It was part of a big package, and we were able to work out some compromise on it.
What were your thoughts, by the way? Again, I'm kind of going outside the box here, but the San Diego County Water Authority cut a deal with IID. Met wasn't thrilled with that deal. What was Coachella's position on that?
Well, our position is our usual position, and that is the water flows through the priority system. Go ahead, do whatever you want. We'll take the water. And we would.
So did you get something out of that deal?
It was part of the quantification settlement agreement. And that, there are just so many pieces in the quantification settlement agreement that, Coachella went from not having a fixed amount of water to having a fixed amount of water in our contract, 330,000 acre feet a year. And then we get to buy 103,000 acre feet from IID on a step-up schedule. We get 20,000 acre feet out of the 1988-89 deal in there. We get the right to buy some water from Metropolitan. And so we end up with a firm supply of about 460,000 acre feet a year.
So you got close to the 500,000 that you were
Yeah, I'm a failure.
You just- I don't think so. Okay, let's move from project to project. CVWD is a state water project contractor, as you indicated. They get their water through an exchange program with MWD, so they actually get Colorado River water. But you're still a partner, and you were and are a partner in the state water project. Did you become a little more active with the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Project after you took over as GM? And that water became more important to you?
Yeah. The district was always active on the state water project. Lowell Weeks helped found the State Water Contractors, Inc., which is a group of state water contractors oversee what the Department of Water Resources is doing in there. And he and Myron Holbert were two of the founding members of that. And he was deeply involved, and he was nice enough to stay on for a couple years to get me introduced to everybody in the state project family in there. And I got elected as a board member on the State Water Contractors, Inc. Lowell had been before, and I served as their president twice, which is no big thing. If you live long enough, you just rotate through. But I was one of the negotiators on the Monterey Amendment to the State Water Project, which was a rewrite in a lot of ways of the 1963 contract to modernize it and reflect on what problems had occurred in there. And one of the problems was the ag agencies had a second position in the contract. Urban agencies were first. They got if there were shortages, they got their water, and the ag people got cut.
Now, we're talking about State Water Project.
State Water Project, yeah, State Water Project. And so, and that actually happened in like 1993, that Kern County and some of the Central Valley contractors for State Project Water got cut to zero. And so we made a couple of runs at trying to do a contract, and finally Dave Kennedy, who was Director of Water Resources at the time, told us, we're going to be at Monterey for a water conference. We're going to come up with a solution. And one of the solution points in there was that State Water Project contractors could sell their entitlement, portions of it, to other state water contractors. And that was something that Coachella wanted and needed, because our Colorado River contract is limited to an area called Improvement District Number 1, which is the lower Coachella Valley. So we needed more water for the upper Coachella Valley, which was booming at that time.
That's an interesting point that I think maybe a lot of people don't understand, that when Coachella, or any agency for that matter, takes water off the Colorado River, it's meant to go in a specified geographic area. Is that reasonably accurate?
Yeah.
For example, Metropolitan, if it sold Colorado River water to LADWP, and LADWP delivered it outside MWD's service area for some reason, that would not be allowed.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a dilemma for you.
Yeah. I mean, we had the situation prior to the quantification settlement agreement that we couldn't use water outside of Improvement District Number 1. And one of the problems with that is when they drew the boundary of Improvement District Number 1, they left out some lands that were good agricultural lands today, but weren't back then because they didn't have drip irrigation. You had flood irrigation, and it's sandy. The water goes down, and you use a tremendous amount of water. So they didn't include them. So those people didn't have to pay taxes on it. But what they did is when drip irrigation came in, they planted them and they pumped water out of the groundwater basin. And that lowered the groundwater basin under ID1. So as part of the quantification settlement agreement, we got a provision that said we could use water outside of ID1 as long as it helped improve the groundwater situation under ID1. And we've done that.
And to be clear, because we've been talking about IID, and you're using the shortened version ID1, that stands for Improvement District.
District, yes, Improvement District number one. They're not ID1.
Yeah, we don't want to start that one.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We should have told them back in 1934, call it something else in there. But so the district has bought a lot of water from state water contractors so that its entitlement is up. And there's a second agency that was created to provide Colorado River or State Water Project water to the Palm Springs area called Desert Water Agency. And the two of those are either the third or fourth largest state water contractors today in terms of entitlement.
They're bigger than Kern and?
No, Met and Kern are the two biggest.
Okay.
And then I think there may be one more, and then Coachella, Coachella Desert.
Yeah, now that I think about it.
So it's really been a plus in there for us. I'd just like to put in a plug for the Thomas E. Levy recharge facility. The district, one of the things that we had as an issue is we needed to recharge the groundwater basin, the lower groundwater basin. But you had this clay layer in there, so if you put the water in, it just went down 8 feet and then hit a drain and went out. When we talked to the hydrogeologist that we had doing modeling, we came up with the idea that maybe where flood flows came out of the canyons on the edge of the valley, that it would have eroded the clay. So one of the things that I had the district do is go out, look around, and do some borings and see what the conditions were. And then we established where we found what looked like a good site. We built a little experimental pond and ran it, and we could see the water levels in the lower aquifer improving, coming up in level. And so the district, after I retired, built a recharge facility there, and they were nice enough to name it after me. And that recharge facility has raised the water level in the lower valley so that we now have some artesian wells.
So kind of came full circle.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, we're going to come to the end of this, I think. Let me give you an opportunity to tell us what you've been doing for the last 15 years. This is 2018. You retired in 2002 and worked for the district for another year after that as in some capacity. So there's a big void there. 15 years. What have you been up to?
Okay. Well, when I retired, I continued to be the lead negotiator for the district on the QSA. And so that took about a year. And then I continued doing a little bit of consulting for the district for about 10 years, mainly on the State Water Project. Then I also did some consulting for developers on different projects, trying to figure out how do you get a project built there. Right now, I'm doing some work for Riverside County on the Salton Sea, trying to come up with what we call the North Lake solution, which is a series of lakes right at the sea, at the north end of the sea, from North Shore over to the west side of the sea, and trying to make it where you can have some recreation, boating, fishing, and that sort of stuff in there.
So you see a day when the Salton Sea will be back?
I see a day when portions of the Salton Sea will be back. You have the issue that there's people like the concept of what they call the sea to sea, which you bring ocean water from the Gulf of California in, and then you concentrate, you dilute the sea, and you put in some desal plants and this sort of stuff, and pump saline brine out to the Gulf of California. The conservative numbers on those are like 10 billion with a B dollars. And no one has stepped up to do it.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to zoom in on Tom's chest. I can't help but notice that you're wearing a funky orange William Mulholland button, and we'll take a close-up of that.
Okay, give me a minute to
for
talk.
A reason. Pardon?
Yeah, let me.
You got him?
Okay. Yeah. One of the general managers of IID was Mike Clinton, and Mike's a good friend of mine. But he, one of the things I did when I recognized that we're going to have litigation at some point, I established an engineering committee and a legal committee, getting really sharp engineers and really sharp attorneys that understand ag and water to give myself and my attorneys advice. You know, are we doing the right things? Are we overlooking stuff? These sorts of things. And one of them, a gentleman named Joe Lord, was an ag engineer, and he came down for a meeting with Coachella, and he had some clients in Imperial, so he went down to Imperial, and next thing I know is Mike Clinton is saying and telling the reporter for the Imperial Valley Press is that Levy is Mulholland-like. He's sending ninjas down to spy on us. And so I saw that like a day, 2 days at the most before a water conference. And in the water business, we had 3 or 4 big water conferences a year. And so one of them was Colorado River Water Users Association in Las Vegas. And so I'm thinking, what can I do? And I'd already talked about 500,000 acre feet to people. So I made these buttons. I made about 50 of them in an afternoon before I caught the plane to Vegas, and passed them out, and they were the hit of the meeting. So I had to go out the next morning and get 200 or 300 done there and passed them out. And it became a fun thing, okay? We did the buttons, and then we grew into a booth at the different water conferences in which we had a cutout of some type. The first one was William Mulholland and me, and people in the water business visiting the conference could come up and get their picture taken, and they got the picture to take home with them. So knowing water people, they'll do anything for a free picture of themselves.
If it's free, I'll take one.
And so I have here, if we could zoom in on it, one, and this is an example that is really Bruce Babbitt. In the original one, we had a cutout of Bruce, but when I took him over, I decided it wouldn't be right to have him in the cutout. So I took the cutout down in there. But we did these for about 10 years, and it was amazing. You had people who had them in their offices that they said 500,000 acre feet, and they were in the offices of IID.
So Bruce, that was 1999. Bruce Babbitt was Secretary of Interior and an Arizona guy.
Yeah, yeah.
How'd that work?
Good. For some reason, Bruce and I got along very well. And so there wasn't any, he understood the water business and knew that Coachella had to argue its issues. That didn't, like most of the people in the water business, it was things were never personal. That's one of the things I find interesting, is that basically all of the people that I've worked with in the water business have been good people. It doesn't mean that they're going to roll over and do what I want. It doesn't mean I'm going to roll over. But there, you can have a discussion, you can argue over stuff, and then you can go out to dinner with them, or you can go have a drink with them and get along fine. And that really, to me is one of the pluses. I mentioned the Colorado River Water Users Association, and that was started or rekindled or whatever by Myron Holberg, who was the executive director of the Colorado River Board of California, and later met GM.
AGM, Assistant General Manager.
Yeah, Assistant General Manager. And they started it, or rekindled it, to provide a forum for people from all the Colorado River Basin states to get together and meet socially. They'd get good people coming in and talking about good stuff, so it was educational, but you got to meet people from the other basin states and find out they weren't ogres and all this sort of stuff, which it's amazing how if you've met the people and you know them a little bit, and then you're sitting down to negotiate, you don't get into personal things. You're talking about the real, what's our problem, what's your problem, how can we reach agreement? And so that.
Along those lines, as we wrap this up, anyone out there in your career that stands out as a Reader's Digest most unforgettable character?
Well, it clearly has to be Lowell Weeks, okay? I mean, I worked with him, knew him for over 30 years. And he was, just really a great guy. He was a history buff, and it gave me a little bit of the history buff syndrome in there. The district had some really good people. Some of them had quirks, but they were all basically good people. Metropolitan had good people. Carl Baraki, I thought, was great. And Myron Holbert, both at the Colorado River Board and at Met, was good. Dennis Underwood, I loved like a brother. He was Colorado River Board and GM at Met. And
Well, and don't forget his little stint there with the feds. When Dennis went back to Washington.
yeah. Oh, yes, I forgot. He was Commissioner of Reclamation in there. And IID, Chuck Shreves, who was their general manager, love him. He was a great guy. He moved to Vegas, and I'd see him at the Colorado River Water Users, and we'd have a good time. Mike Clinton, I saw him in the last month on the Salton Sea stuff, and he's, we had some disagreements, but we never took him personally.
Amazing. Okay.
Oh, and one other, Jay Malinowski.
Come on in. You wouldn't. We're going to call that a day, Tom, and I thank you very, very much. I know you did a lot of homework on this because I had to read it all before we came, but it was very good. Good background, and we appreciate your time. And also, you helped set these up today with yourself, and with our next victim.
Yeah, you stuck me with a job. I'm general manager of the Colorado River Authority of California and the 6-agency committee, and our function is to have a good time. No, it is to do this, and we also do tours of California and the other Colorado River Basin states.
I'd have kept doing it, but I moved out of state.
Yeah.
Okay, again, Tom, thank you very much. And by the way, in closing, most of the people that Tom mentioned, they are on file with Oral Histories.
Yeah.
So it's quite a project. So anyone interested in any of those folks, come up.